It's loading. There we go. I always love when I come into it and I'm already saying something. So hi, everybody. Welcome to another Love Bomb Chat. I am joined by the very lovely Dr. Philip Chase. This is the second time, I believe, that you've been on my channel. Our first discussion was a very singularly focused conversation, and this will be a broader conversation.
Yes. That was a great chat, though, about American Gods, which, we both had a lot of things to say about that one, but I'm happy to be back and
happy to have you back.
Yeah. Whatever we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, we were talking behind here, just saying that I was on Philip's channel earlier this year because he very graciously asked me to be on, and then we were on Angela's channel to have a really great conversation of religion and fantasy and religion and literature. I think it ended up being more in literature, I feel like, than fantasy focused, but it was a really good chat.
It was a, kind of a focused on really religion and violence and literature. And there was a lot of historical context, which you brought a lot to the table in terms of that. But that was a really, I thought, one of the really more meaningful discussions I've been in. So yeah, I enjoyed that one a lot.
I had a lot of fun with that. Yeah. It was the first conversation like that I've been a part of, I think, and probably the only that I've been a part of like that. It's generally just been kind of book focused as opposed to theme. So I really enjoyed that. Plus I got to meet some new people on that, like PL, which was great. And everyone was just really, really lovely in that group. So
yeah, because PL's books are his Drowned Kingdom saga is really in terms of what he's dealing with there. So,
yeah, for sure. Hello, everybody.
Look at all the nice people there. Derry.
Yes, hello. Hey, Brian. Got a good group here. So I always ask everyone when they come on, is there something or what have you been reading and loving lately, or what have you read recently that you have really loved and enjoyed?
Wow. Okay. Well, how much time do you have?
An hour and a half.
Oh no. Well, the latest thing that I read today was a bit of One Piece because I've
been you've been on a big One Piece kick.
I have. It's been a lot of fun. It's just keep calling it my happy place. Although there's some kind of serious stuff that it's dealing with at the moment, but there's always this lightheartedness, this humor to it that gets me smiling, and I really enjoy that about it. But I'm also reading the SPFBO books that have been given to me. I saw that Brian is there in the chat, and he is one of the wonderful individuals who was kind enough to join my SPFBO 10 team or SPFBOX team, and he gave me what looks like a really fun book.
Nice.
The Tenacious Tale of Tana the Tender Sword.
That's a great name.
I have not read his yet, but I did finish one of the 5 semifinalists from our group. So each of my team members gave me a semifinalist to read for SPFBOX. And for those of you who don't know about it, most of you probably do. But it's a self-published fantasy blog off a contest founded by Mark Lawrence. That is all about shining a spotlight on self-published fantasy. And I'm one of the 10 judges for the contest. And the judge, when I say judge, a lot of them are teams like I had this year, a team, which is fantastic because I did it by myself the first year.
It's so much work.
So much work. I mean, I'm glad I did it, but I couldn't do it again.
I always commend people who can. I'm like, I don't even being in charge of a team. It's so much extra reading. Like you really have to plan it out. I feel like in terms of your annual schedule of reading to kind of work around it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a lot of planning, but it's a lot easier with a team helping me. Hey, Daniel.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel. So how many books do you feel like you end up reading in the end? Is it about?
Oh, I can tell you exactly.
So what is it?
Last year, it was a total of 39 books that I read just for SPFBO.
That's a ton.
39 books, yeah. This year, it's going to be because my team is a huge game changer for me, really.
Yeah.
So I'll read their 5 semifinalists.
Okay.
And then I will recommend one of those to be the finalist from the group. And then I'll read 9 other books. So 14 as opposed to 39. So yeah,
14 is still a good chunk. That's a lot. Yeah. That's more than a lot of people read in a year. Yeah.
This is true.
But so how did you get involved in that initially?
The short answer is Mark Lawrence asked me.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, and when somebody like you're one of your literary, there she is. We were just talking about you. Yeah, we were just talking about that wonderful discussion about religion and holy war and fantasy over on your channel on Gala. But yeah, he when somebody like Mark Lawrence says, "Hey, would you like to be a judge?" I was like, "Yes."
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I'm really happy to be able to give back a little bit that way. Everybody who does it, is a volunteer, and most of the people who enter the contest are very appreciative of all that work that goes into it. And it really is a community. We're familiar with communities around here, and the SPFBO has its own little community that is formed around it, and even people who've been involved in the contest in the past will come back and be supportive, and and a lot of the authors will be, they'll be sending commiserations to the friend and all that kind of thing. So it's just a great thing to be part of. I'm really happy to be there and to have the privilege of reading books that people have poured their heart and soul into, and
and you kind of relate to that more than most, I would think, in that you are also an independently published author. So I heard you have a conversation one time. I can't remember who it was with, because there was something that piqued my interest in that chat where you were saying you were agented at one time. And you had gone to this party and you saw an author there, and I got very excited by that. But then I never prompted to then follow up with that as, well, how did that end up coming about for you? Because I am now in the process of this myself. My manuscript is finished and it's going to an editor. And I decided this past week officially that I'm going to independently publish my book as opposed to querying and going through the agenting process and all that kind of stuff. So how did you kind of come to that decision to
self-publish? As opposed to traditional. So I had a wonderful agent, a really great guy, who a really good agent will actually help a writer improve their work. And he did that for me. We had a really good relationship for quite a few years. And, from the very beginning, he was the first moment I felt like, wow, maybe I could actually make a go of this, was when he came on board. And made some suggestions. Initially said, yes, I do want to represent you, but I want you to do some things to your story first. And so I worked with him for a couple of years that way. And then he made a pitch every time I finished a book in the trilogy. So he made a total of 3 pitches, and none of them obviously resulted in a yes from a publisher, which was totally fine. But the last time, it was partly because of the pandemic. So I don't want to make it sound like the traditional publishing is falling into a chasm or something, because it's not the case. But it took a year for some of the editors to even acknowledge that they had gotten his pitch.
That's still happening.
I know. It's still happening. And I thought about it at that moment. Okay, so I got your thing. It was a year after he sent it in.
Right.
And at that point, I thought to myself, I just don't want to be hostage to this process anymore. I want, and it was the most liberating decision I can recall making. To say, I'm going to self-publish this. I know, I believe in it. I worked so hard on it. I worked with AP Canavan as my developmental editor, in addition to the agent that I worked with. So I had some real expert eyes on this story, and I've revised and revised and revised, and I made it as good as I can. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to just do it. It was so liberating, and I have never once regretted going
that's so great.
the self-publishing route.
I'm hoping I will feel that way, because I'm still in the throes of feeling very nervous about it.
Well, I would say that you're doing a few things right. One of them is that you've made yourself part of a community, which is super important because obviously your very first readers are going to be us. They're going to be
I would
people
think so,
you
yeah.
know around here, most likely, and your family and your friends.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's a really smart thing to do, to have made yourself not just around here, but on if you're involved in other social media, I'm sure. And
I'm trying to learn TikTok. I started a couple days ago. I hate it so much, but I know it's necessary. It pains me so much.
I'm not on it. I'm not on
it. So I wrote a romantasy novel, and this is like, you have to be on TikTok if you want your indie romantasy to do well. Basically, from what I'm gathering, this is the research that I've done.
Okay.
And I'm so self-conscious recording this stuff because I just feel so uncomfortable. I feel like it's different from sitting down to record a YouTube video where I feel like I'm engaging in a conversation that's going to be lengthy, as opposed to this like goofy brief clip. So a couple of days ago, I was trying to record my first one, and Josh kept walking in another room, and I was like, "You are forbidden to come in here. No one can look at me doing this." Like, I am so embarrassed. So it's becoming a thing that I'm just gonna have to get more comfortable with.
Yeah.
But it'll happen, or it won't. But I'm working on
Laura,
it.
let me ask you, if you think it's awkward for you, how do you think it would be for me?
I think you would find your people. I think you would. This is what I'm learning. There's a group for everybody on TikTok. It's happening. So
Yeah?
I think it could happen for you if you wanted to give it a go. But I think that you have found a really big new community on YouTube, and that's the One Piece community. Like, your video numbers are insane whenever I see you've uploaded a One Piece video. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all I'm doing is the same thing I do when I'm talking about any story that I read, but there is just a much bigger audience out there for One Piece.
Yeah. So why do you think, what compels you with One Piece? And do you think that is kind of applicable to the majority of the reader base? Like, is there something specific that draws people in so deeply and passionately for One Piece?
Well, for me, what I've delighted in discovering is that there's so much depth to the series, that there's all this one. I mean, he has illusions all over the place. I'm reading a part of it now where it's clear that he's referencing Dante's Inferno.
Oh, nice.
Oh yeah, he is all over the place. Gulliver's Travels, there's Journey to the West. There's just so many things that get referenced in such a playful way that I kind of fell in love with it for that. But also, there's some really important themes dealing with some deep, painful stuff.
Sure.
And again, it's bearable because of the humor and the goofiness of it. It's actually quite an uncanny way that Oda has of that he's the mangaka, is Eiichiro Oda, but he has an uncanny way of combining the goofy with the very serious in a way that I find very compelling. So we're talking. Marianne's asking. We're talking about One Piece.
Yeah, One Piece
manga. So yeah, it's just whoa. I didn't realize. I mean, I did know because I had read a few manga already with Murphy. So I did have an idea that there's actual literary depth to this genre. That this medium is really quite supportive of great storytelling. So I wasn't shocked to find it, but I had this superficial impression of One Piece being just a goofy pirate story, and it is that, but it's way more than just that too.
I love that. Yeah. That's awesome. So you mentioned Dante's Inferno, and I have a question for you because, like me, you like older literature. And when I mean older literature, I don't mean literature from like 1900. I mean several centuries old literature, or millennia old literature. So when you started reading Beowulf for the first time, what was that experience like for you? Because when I read the Iliad for the first time, for example, I was like, this is incredible. I'm hooked. I'm here for this. What was it that you were like, this is it? This is the focus?
Yeah, it was kind of a religious experience for me in a way.
Yeah.
And it was I read it probably earlier in translation when I was probably in high school and thought it was cool. But
Right.
what I'll tell you about is when I first learned it in Old English, and that's when I was a senior in college,
Okay.
university, as people over across the pond would say,
And in Canada.
and in Canada. That's right.
Yeah.
Our good neighbors to the north as
Yes.
well. So university. When I was at the end of my bachelor's degree, I decided to take a year to
Underage at 5.
I was probably reading comic books then, but yeah, no, it was. I went to this very alternative college here in the
Okay.
States called the Evergreen State College, where there are no grades and no exams or anything like that.
Okay.
Yep, it was kind of a hippie school,
Yeah.
and they allowed us to, in our senior year, do a self-directed study as long as we had a mentor to work with. So I would meet with this mentor every week and tell him what I was doing, what I was reading. I would usually write something up in a paper or two or whatever, and share that with him, and we'd just chat and talk for hours about.
That's awesome.
About the medieval literature that I was reading.
Yeah.
It was so cool because I was there to learn. I was not there for grades. It wasn't.
Sure.
Nobody ever asked the question, how do I get an A in this class?
That is so the antithesis to the entirety of my academic career. I'm so jealous.
Yeah. No, I loved it so much. I loved it so much. And I wish we had no grades everywhere.
Yeah.
Because grades get in the way of learning, actually.
Oh, so much.
They get in the way of real learning.
Yeah.
They encourage bulimic learning, but, where you just stuff everything in and then you just puke it out on the test and then you forget about it. But that's not really transformative learning, is it?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Bulimic learning, because it's true. And I mean, in academia currently, it's such a competitive space because, especially in the humanities, because there's so few positions that are waiting, that even at the undergraduate level, I would overhear people being like, well, what did you get? Well, what did you get? And I'm like, it doesn't affect you. It doesn't matter. So that's so interesting.
Yeah, no, it was so cool. And everyone who was there to learn. And I loved it so much. And that's a long way of saying my senior year. Brian, that's so funny. My senior year, all I did was learn Old English and Old Norse and Middle English, and studied all these works of literature that I was really invested in. And but I read Beowulf in Old English, the entirety of it, during that period, and I had this fire in me to learn it. And it's hard to say where that comes from, but I was fascinated by the antiquity of it, as I know you relate to that.
Yeah.
The fact that this was a language that people spoke more than 1,000 years ago, and that people lived their lives in this language. That was their lens on the world, and so it's a way of seeing the world as maybe getting a glimpse into the way these older people saw the world, and learning a lot about, I think, not just them, but about ourselves in the process. And
for sure. I get that so much, especially whenever anyone would refer to Latin as a dead language. I was like, it's so mind-boggling to me when you think of the scope that was the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And that not being a language that's spoken anymore. I'm like, that's just insane to me that you covered that much landmass. Yeah. And we refer to that as a dead language. It's just, to me, it would always just, it would be a very, very strange experience. But like, finding someone to teach you Old English and Old Norse, I feel like, is a really niche thing. No?
Yeah.
So, like, did you plan ahead with that at all when you were thinking, I want to go to my alternative college because there's a professor there that like teaches this or knows this? Was that something that you were already thinking about at that point?
Yes and no. I think I was interested because I had read Lord of the Rings when I was 12.
Okay.
I wanted to be J.R.R. Tolkien at that age.
Right.
But also I had, that was so much fun, Evie. It really was. I love the way Derry puts that. She has a beautiful way with words. Yeah, so true. Yeah. I read Lord of the Rings, and so that was probably something that I had long wanted to do. But I
Sure.
took the summer prior to my senior year, I had taken history of the English language with this same professor who became my mentor.
Okay. Gotcha.
And that's where it was like, yes, I'm going to do this, and I got to learn a little bit of Old English during
Yeah.
that period, but it was really more of a linguistics course,
Yeah.
history of the language, which I was fascinated by.
I love that type of stuff. Yeah, the
Yeah,
history of language and linguistics courses in general are so fascinating.
very cool. I actually ended up teaching history of the English language at
Oh, wow.
different points too. Yeah, so.
That must have been really, really fascinating. Oh,
Oh, I love it. I
yeah.
think language is so intrinsic to how we experience the world, the entire lens into the world. And we wouldn't be able to do any of the things we do without language.
Got it. Yeah, exactly. My undergraduate classical studies department was co-linked with linguistics and languages. So we were all in the same unit.
Yeah.
And I was that kid that was the overachieving kid. Like I had to be involved with everything because I just wanted to know the inner workings of everything.
Yeah.
And my goal was to work at a university in the capacity of teaching because I already worked at a university in a different field.
Yeah.
But I would sit in on all the departmental meetings because I was I was the undergrad rep for the department.
Oh, cool.
And I just loved listening to all the descriptions of the linguistics courses. And I thought, why aren't we like shouting from the rooftops these amazing classes? Because our department just kept shrinking and shrinking because we were, in this off corner that didn't get any funding, and not many people are interested in learning Hittite. But I thought it sounded absolutely great. So yeah, I just think that when certain things pair so naturally, kind of how religion and history pair very naturally, but also language and history pair so beautifully. And I think a lot of the time the language component gets left behind. And it's unfortunate because watching the evolution of how language changes, especially if you look at Britain, like the evolution of language there is so imbued with the historical events that are happening. So I just think it's so fascinating.
I agree. Totally agree. Yeah. So to answer Derry's question there about whether I'm still in touch, I was until he passed away a few years ago. But I even at a certain point came back to the college to visit him and introduced him to my wife. And so she got to meet him as well.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was really neat. And I had done various things for him during the time I knew him, but also, we stayed in touch, and I made a quote from the Battle of Malden. Actually, I had written it in really beautiful Old English script. I used to be something of an artist, but
nice.
I had done borders around it with these gorgeous kind of Celtic knots and stuff. I wrote this quote that he was very fond of, and it's from the Battle of Malden, which is a poem that describes a Viking incursion in East Anglia in 993, I think.
Okay.
And the local lord, Berchnoth, the local English lord, had called up his militia in order to repel these Vikings. The Vikings had landed on what was kind of an island off of the coast, but during the low tide is connected by a causeway. And so it was easy for the English to stand there on the mainland in front where the causeway would link to that island and prevent the Vikings from going in force. So the Vikings said, why don't you just let us all across and we'll have a battle? Or we can just sail somewhere else and raid, So really the English lord didn't have much of a choice. So he let them cross. They had a pitched battle, which the Vikings just totally won. I mean,
no surprise.
No surprise. The Vikings were just, they rampaged. The local lord Berchnoth had his head chopped off, and his last retainers were, fighting to avenge him, and they knew they were going to die, but they kept going up to the bitter end. And one of them probably didn't really happen, but in the poem, at least, he stopped to say, "He shall the herdra, herta the cainra, mod shall the mara, the urmayan litlath," which means something like our purpose shall be the harder, our hearts shall be the keener, our courage shall be greater as our strength lessens.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I love that.
The courage in the face of certain doom.
That's so good. Yeah. This is a beautiful segue to a promise I made Joanna, in that you must read the Warlord Chronicles. That could not have been more perfectly placed.
Yeah, although the Anglo-Saxons were the enemies of King Arthur.
Yeah, I don't know how you haven't read the series, because it's so good.
The truth is, I have read a lot of Arthurian.
I'm sure you have. Yeah.
Over the years.
Yeah.
Much older
I had too, honestly. I even read the Mort d'Arthur. Like, I read it in the French originally. And I feel like they all pale in comparison to the Warlord Chronicles.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Well, I am going to read some Bernard Cornwell in December.
Okay.
So that's with the Quilluminati. But I promised, I'm beginning to promise people that I'm going to read Warlord Chronicles in 2025.
Okay.
So there you have it. I'm committed now. I said it publicly.
It's on air, guys. It's on air. Someone message Joanna right now to let her know. I've read The Last Kingdom. It's the only one in the Saxon Chronicles that I've read, but it's one of the few instances where I've actually seen the adaptation before reading the material. Yeah. And I love that adaptation. It is hands down, I think, one of the best ones that has been made in a very, very, very long time. Yes, it's specifically written for you. Joanna basically said something along the lines to me too. She's like, I don't know why you haven't read this. You are going to love it. Like, stop whatever you're reading and just go read Warlord.
So Bernard Cornwell, yes, he actually wrote it just for me.
Just for Philip. It's in the dedication. For Philip. One day.
And I'm so mean. I haven't even read it.
I know. This is exactly it. It's going to be absolutely perfect.
Well, I'm going to feel clever about having learned Welsh when I read Warlord Chronicles, because I could list the names, I guess. And
I will say, definitely advocate for the audiobooks for that series. Jonathan Keeble is so good.
People are going to get mad at me, but I tried. Okay. So to me, the pinnacle of audiobooks had to be Andy Serkis reading The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, it's excellent. Yes.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to start there, because I'm not an audiobook kind of person. I really tried so hard, but I kept getting so, how do I say this nicely? Okay, so either
distracted.
I kept wanting to rewind all the time.
Yeah,
that's the kind of reader I am. I'm reading. I will, especially if it's anything with some depth to it.
Sure.
Constantly rereading passages and thinking, wow, that would have great sentence. So I pause.
Yeah.
Reading, and I can't do that with an audiobook, and I miss that. The other thing is, okay, I thought I have to really pay attention, and I won't miss anything. So I would just kind of sit there and listen, and then I would fall asleep.
You're like my husband. He can't do it. He's the same way.
Yeah. I cannot do audiobooks.
I've given him little snippets at a time. Specifically, the latest one that I gave him was Sharp Ends by Joe Abercrombie. And there was one specific, it's the short stories. And I said, there's one specific short story that I want you to listen to. It's like 20 minutes. So I was like, it's not a full-blown commitment. Yeah. And he ended up coming upstairs and he was like, I really enjoyed that. And I was like, are you going to listen to the rest? And he said, no. So I tried. It did not work. But
he humored you, though.
He did. I was successful for 20 minutes. And that was the end of the experiment. But I'm hoping maybe one day. But I get it. It's not for everyone. I found for me that I immersion read parts of that series, and I really enjoyed doing that. But Jonathan Keeble's is it Keeble or Keeble? I think it's Keeble. Performance was just so excellent. And I don't know if you've listened to any of First Law, if you're not really an audiobook listener, but Stephen Pacey is my ultimate audiobook narrator.
I hear so much praise for Pacey, and I've heard of the Keeble, if that's how you say it as well.
I think it is, yeah.
There's only one audiobook narrator for me, and his name is Alan.
Alan, I can't wait to listen to it. I'm so excited. Honestly, I bought your book when it came out, and then I heard Alan was going to narrate, and I was like, I'm waiting, like, because I want to immersion read it now with Alan in my head, and it's going to be an experience that I am so excited for.
I'm excited too for people to hear Alan's narration. Super excited because he really, if you're the type of
you kind of just have to
that's true. That's true. Oh dear. But now everyone's gonna know if I'm lying.
Well, no.
I'm actually the world's worst liar too.
I think we'll be able to suss it out, but I'm hopeful that you will enjoy it.
But yeah, no, I'm so excited for people to hear Alan's narration. He does such a beautiful job with the voices, and there are certain voices. It was like he was born to read these voices.
Do them, right? Yeah. I love when that happens and it's just a really natural pairing. And we think about, there's this constant conversation that goes on as to whether audiobooks are reading or not. And I come back to it in my head that I'm like, ancient stories were performed.
Yes.
People didn't have the book in front of them. That's just not how it was. Right. So I love the idea of someone just connecting with that material and bringing it to life for you in a way. Yes, Joanna, and we got a firm 2025 promise. So, and it was the most beautiful segue, Joanna. You have to go back and listen. It was perfection.
There's a conspiracy that Joanna organized, and now I'm stuck reading Warlord Chronicles. So. Which I'm actually really looking forward to very much.
So I just think it's kind of a ridiculous conversation in general that people are having of audio versus physical reading.
It's not a versus thing at all. It's not.
It's not.
It really isn't. It's not that one experience is somehow more valid than the other, but they are different experiences, I think.
Yes, they are.
To me, when you're listening to an audiobook, which I've already confessed I'm not very good at, to me, it's a performance. And the narrator brings something to that's an element that you don't have when you're reading the book.
Yes.
Right. That just seems to me intuitive that this is a performance and you are being treated to this person's interpretation of this text. Whereas when you're reading it, those voices, Derry made a comment earlier about not being able to listen to Realm of the Elderlings because she has that canon in her mind.
In her head, exactly.
She has those voices, she has those images, everything.
For sure.
So yeah, I think they're different experiences, but they're not. It's not this versus that at all.
Right. It doesn't invalidate the other. Essentially, it's interesting because I started going to an in-person book club because I live in a rural area. I'm isolated, and I was like, I need friends, that aren't in my computer. So I joined a romance book club, which is a new experience for me. Yeah. And I had our first meeting a couple of nights ago, and the book that we read was called Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen. And Julia Whalen, her professional career is that she is an audiobook narrator. She's done over 600 books. She's phenomenal. Wow. And she was, before that, a film. She was an actress. She mostly worked on TV, and I think she did a couple of films, but she then wrote 2 novels. And it was funny because I, without even thinking about it, was like, oh, well, I'm going to listen to the book. And I'll immersion read parts, but I'm primarily going to listen because I already know that I like the cadence of her voice and how she brings the story to life. And it was funny to me because part of the plot was one of the characters was lying about who she was, and she put on a fake accent, which you hear in the audiobook, but you don't experience as a physical reader. And that was something that came up in the conversation that we had because half of the people physically read and half listened or immersion read. Okay. And they were like, oh, well, I didn't even really think of that. And I was like, you missed out on so much context with the accents of faking a personality and all these different things. And it was just such an interesting way of thinking about it. And I thought, I wonder if certain books, if I would have enjoyed them more if I had that experience of actually listening to someone, because in certain cases, I feel like I agree with Derry 100%, where I have such a canonized idea of how someone sounds in my head that I will forbid anyone else's voice coming into my head to take over that. Yeah. But when I don't connect with it in that way, I almost wonder if someone else's interpretation would enhance my experience. So it's this weird line with reading. It's interesting, I feel like.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Evie, it's nitpicky about semantics. Exactly. It's listening. Yeah. It's the same as experiencing a story. And I felt this way about
listening either.
Exactly. I felt this way about Spear Cuts Through Water, which I read a few months ago, and I listened to and read simultaneously, and I thought it was an interesting experience having both for that. Have you read Spear Cuts Through Water?
I've only read one book by Simon Jimenez, and that was the sci-fi one, Vanished Birds.
Vanished Birds.
But I will read Spear Cuts Through Water. I actually, that was our first Quilluminati read. I really did enjoy Vanished Birds.
Yeah.
There was a lot of talent on display there. And I loved how many chances he took in that book. It was,
we'll settle in.
very impressive, especially given that it was his debut.
Yeah. I felt that way about Spear. It was just one of those things that when I was reading it, I thought, why are you doing it this way? And then when I got to the end, I sat back and said, I know exactly why you did it that way. And I respect it 100%. I was confused, but we got there in the end. And it was just a very trusting experience, I felt like. And talk about a book that I felt should be advertised as an epic and isn't. Like, you need to go into reading that the way you would read an epic. It's just a very different approach, I feel like, as opposed to someone just saying, oh, it's an epic fantasy novel. I'm like, no, those are not the same. But a very interesting read.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the Spear Cuts Through Water. Derry's so funny. She said the flash of fear. She knew.
I did see it too. There's that little flicker of like the eye twitch of like, oh God, Evie.
No, I haven't read it yet, you know?
Yeah. Oh man.
Evie was so kind in sending me the book too. So, but I know I'm not special because she sent that book to most of us, I think.
Yeah. Ariel, I physically read Piranesi the first time, and it's our book club book this month, and I listened to it, and it was beautiful. So I highly recommend either. I will say, and I'm not sure if it's because I knew the story already, but reading it physically, it's such an atmospheric book, and I just felt it a little bit more, but the narrator is phenomenal for it, and it's just so good. I absolutely adore Piranesi.
I love that book, by the way.
It's so good.
And I have no idea why, but I think it's my most watched review I've ever done.
Is it really?
Just dedicated review. I think
the
most watched dedicated review is for, if you're not counting One Piece.
Yes. Yeah.
Piranesi, which I loved that book. It was just a dreamlike experience that left me feeling like I was sort of wandering in a dream. Even after
I was really worried that my husband wouldn't like it, because I have been just raving about this book from the second I picked it up. And I knew it was one of those books. I don't know if you've had this experience, maybe with Beowulf, but when you just read the first few lines and you know it's going to be something that you love from beginning to end. I knew with this book, the second I started reading, I was like, we're connected. I'm here. And when I finished it, I dreamt of that world for a few weeks. It was very strange. Like, I kept picturing myself in the house and just listening to the waves and all that kind of stuff. So when he picked up the book this month, I was like, no pressure, but you must love this book. And he did love it, which was great. But it was,
he's a good sport. He was.
Is. But it was really interesting just also that every person I've spoken to, or I then ended up watching several reviews, yours included, after I read it, everyone had a different take on what the mystery was in the story, which is something that's so rare. I feel like I don't even know if I've encountered another book where everyone had their own version of what was possibly happening.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's a story that invites. It doesn't force a conclusion on the reader. It doesn't say this is what this actually is. It's very open-ended in that way, and I think that's where you get that that array of thoughts about what actually was going on there, you know. And I love that. That takes a lot of skill, by the way, to pull off the way that Susanna Clarke does there.
I'm gonna read her her other book, Jonathan Strange, in November, I believe, is when I'm supposed to read it. I've been wanting to read it for a while, and then I saw that Jake and Kyle were going to do a buddy read, and I injected myself into it. So I messaged them, and I was like, I saw this is happening, and I've been wanting to read it. This will motivate me to read it.
Many years ago, long before I even knew what BookTube was.
Yeah. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I love it. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It amazes me that Susanna Clarke is the author of both of these books, because the voice is very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if I don't know, if Jane Austen had chosen to write fantasy or something, you know. So the fact that she's able to pull it off so convincingly is amazing, and it's just beautifully atmospheric as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But yeah, I probably should reread that at some point, because it's been a long time.
If you want to in November. No pressure for this massive book, but yeah, I hear you. Are you a big TBR planner? Do you plan well in advance, or are you more mood? Are you a mix?
I'm more of a mix. I used to make seasonal TBR videos for my channel, and I would realize that I was way too optimistic usually about what I could fit into a season of reading. So I stopped doing those just because I felt guilty about not really living up to my highly aspirational TBR videos. But
I always felt bad when I would make a video saying, this is what I'm going to read. And people would message me saying, did you love it? And I would go, I have not read the first page. So I'm far too much of a mood reader to be able to, other than commit to the odd buddy read and the one book club thing that I do with Josh now.
Yeah, that's what ends up being prioritized for me, are the buddy reads, and nowadays SPFBO, and, you know, the things that I'm. But then I have these series that I've started that I haven't finished, and we all have this issue around here, I think.
Yes. But, yeah, I'm a binger though. That tends to be my problem. Is I get sidetracked and I fall into a series, and I'm like, I'm here, and I just go through the whole thing. That's why I read the whole Cosmere last year. I couldn't stop myself. Yeah, other than Sunlit Man, it was the only one I didn't get to by January of this year.
Okay. Well, I'm determined to read Rhythm of War in November to get ready. Yeah.
Okay.
Get ready for Wind and something.
Wind and Truth, yeah.
Wind and Truth, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. I've read the first 3 Stormlight Archive books. And quite enjoyed the first 2. Oathbringer was not my cup of tea so much.
Okay. I loved Oathbringer.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping I will enjoy Rhythm of War. But either way, I'm going to read the 5th one. Because I feel like
I'm curious to see what your thoughts will be, because I almost group them a bit differently, in that I feel like a lot of people that love book 1 really love book 2. I love book 2, but I struggled with book 1. But I love book 3, and I enjoyed book 4. And a lot of people that love book 1 struggle with book 4. So it's this like weird dichotomy of stuff. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts will be.
I'm a little wary. I'm a little scared in a way, because I'm definitely old school, I guess, in the way that I prefer what the kids these days call soft magic. So it was, you know, Brandon Sanderson's famous for being the hard magic dude out there, right? Yes. And I'm not all that interested in the intricacies of how fabrioles were created, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm a little bit like, am I gonna like this or not? But we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are gonna be after that 4th book. That's all I'm gonna say. But for me, I just love. I like remembering everything as I'm experiencing it. I know obviously books traditionally aren't published back to back to back, and that like you get one a month type thing until the whole series is out. You can have years between books, a la George R. R. Martin. Yeah. But for me, I just love getting so lost in a world, specifically a fantasy series. Like that for me is what I'll binge. And it's mostly because that way I'm fully up on the magic, the world, the politics, the places, and I haven't forgotten anything. And I feel like that for me enhances my reading experience. I know that's not the case for everybody, but I personally feel like it brings me more enjoyment where I'm I'm already with the characters. I'm connected. I'm invested as I continue that entire journey with them.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting in that when I did read the Cosmere, I would group binge where I binged Mistborn, and then I Heir 2, and then when it got to Stormlight, I was like, oh, okay, there's only 4, so I'm being cut off here. But I loved it. It was just a very enjoyable experience for me.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I will definitely finish these 5 books of Stormlight Archive, and the other Sanderson book I'm curious to read is The Emperor's Soul. I hear a lot of praise for that, and I've heard that that's his most kind of literary, doing air quotes, everyone, that's his most literary book. So
it is.
I'm intrigued to read that one, actually.
I actually think you'll really like that one. It has that kind of mysticism, and I don't want to say like spiritual aspect that like something like a Beowulf or, an Odyssey would have, Iliad would have. But there is something just much more poetic about Emperor's Soul than there is about his other works.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's the nature of the magic, the nature of the dynamic between the characters, but everything just beautifully flows in that book. I think it is, without a question, his best piece that he's written. Cool. And it's a novella, so it's just, it's interesting that, and sometimes I kind of lean back into that thought where I'm like, Brandon, like maybe we cut back a little bit on some of this stuff and we focus on things like this, because you can obviously do this so beautifully,
Oh yeah.
And I just, I would love more Emperor Soul quality from him.
He knows he can do it.
But
I think he's also a very smart person. And
yes.
He knows what he's doing when he's, he's a very productive author. My hat's off to him. My hat's absolutely off to him. And I think that he's made a conscious decision that I'm going to make books that are accessible and will have a broad audience, and books that I can write relatively quickly.
Yes.
Rather than really craft something. But maybe he thought, I want to prove that I can do this. So he wrote The Emperor's Soul, So good for him, I think that's cool.
It is. It's interesting to look at the range of an author. Has there been an experience for you where you have had one book from an author that you've said, this is my absolute top, I love this, it's a 5-star read, and then you've picked up another book from them and thought, this doesn't even work for me at all? Is this the same person? Like, have you had that experience?
I've never had that extreme. No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I've definitely had favorites within a series and maybe, slightly less favorites or something like that. But never had that drastic an experience where I was like, oh, this is not anything close to how much I love this other book by this author. So no, I can't honestly say I've ever had that. Even when I read Realm of the Elderlings and was warned by so many people, this one, tetralogy in there, the Rainwild's Chronicles, it's just not as good as the rest, and blah, blah, blah. So maybe it was just I had lowered my expectations or something. But I quite enjoyed it, actually. I thought it was added a lot to my experience of that series because of the lore and the world building that it included, which is not usually what you think of. I think when you think of Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, you think
maybe not.
The character work is a big thing, and justifiably so. So to me, though, I thought this was a great addition to to the Realm of the Elderlings. And added a lot to my enjoyment of the experience as a whole.
Sure.
Maybe it didn't contain my favorite character work by her, but there's still a lot there, and she's still an immensely talented author, so. Yeah.
I actually felt that way of Age of Madness, because since we last spoke, I have now read Age of Madness.
Yay! Okay.
And I still haven't started Realm of the Elderlings, which is something else that you and I discussed, because I still don't feel like I'm emotionally ready. I just don't.
It's peak fantasy, peak literature, but it'll put you through the ringer for sure.
Yes, and I haven't felt like I'm in the right headspace for it yet. I know I will eventually, but I haven't gotten there yet. But with Age of Madness, I felt the exact same way, because everyone kept saying to me, the character work in Age of Madness is so much better than First Law, and the women are just top tier characters. And I was like, okay, I loved First Law, so I'm here for this. and I enjoyed it, but I still prefer First Law, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and
A lot of people do.
yeah, it was just one of these things for me where I looked at it. Glocta is my favorite character of all time. And, you know, like, I don't get him as a POV in Age of Madness. So I'm like, automatically, I'm less invested. And it's not to say that the characters aren't intriguing and endearing in many ways, because there were several characters of Age of Madness that I thought, great. Orso is a top tier character for me forever. He's so good. But it just didn't hit the same for me that it did, but I still enjoyed it. You know, it's one of those things. So I completely understand that.
Yep. No,
Mm-hmm.
personally, I'm in the, I think, minority that actually loves Age of Madness more than the
I
original.
think you guys are the majority.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not sure because the characters are just so beloved from that first trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to ask people for their top characters in all of the First Law books, they probably would, the majority would name Glocta or
Glocta.
Logan, or, they would be characters from the original trilogy.
Right. Logan was your favorite, correct? In the original trilogy? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I'm being completely honest with you, yes.
Yes.
I feel like Glocta
Yeah.
might be the cooler answer, but I actually just love Logan so much. Yeah.
Jazal is my husband's answer. So
Okay.
there's a wide swath from book one. He was like, oh yeah, Jazal. And I remember because he read it before me, because I bought that book. I do a thing every Christmas where I buy him a bunch of book ones after I do a little bit of research, and I thought he might like this. And all the people that recommended me that book were just like, just wait to see what he says about Glocta. And I thought, okay, great. And gave him the book. He read it, and I said, so is this one character your favorite? And he goes, no. And was like offended that I asked him that, and said, it's this guy named Jazal. So when I read it and I got like a third of the way through, I was like, this is your choice. You know, like, what? But of course I went for the psychotic guy, Glocta. So I mean, like, we all have our choices.
We all do. There's Brian there being Team Bias. So
I love Baez as well. So much. I love Baez. But oddly enough, my favorite of all of the First Law universe books is the Heroes. I have come to the decision
I love the
that
Heroes.
it's the Heroes. Yeah.
I love the Heroes.
It's incredible. It's so good. It's so good. Did you feel for you that Age of Madness worked better because there's that terminology, right, that you're a gardener or an architect in terms of your writing? And I feel like for Joe in First Law, he's a gardener and he's an architect in Age of Madness. Like, does that work stylistically better for you?
Yeah, I think it worked better for me because I got the same brilliant character work and humor and, the same underpinning grim, dark outlook on the universe and humanity. So we got a lot of, people going back to the mud and all of that.
Yeah.
We had all that, but we also had, I felt, a much more conscious incorporation of theme in Age of Madness than we saw in First Law, which I love. I'm not knocking First Law, so I'd be the last to do that. I love First Law, but I think he was much more consciously looking at things like class dynamics and otherizing in several respects. There's stuff about immigration and there's just all kinds of, I think there's more depth to Age of Madness, I would argue, than there is to First Law. But I also think that those characters that appeared in First Law probably lived in his head for the longest time.
Yeah. He knew them so well, I feel like.
So well. And I think that comes through so beautifully in that trilogy. So I get it.
Yeah. Do you think that he could have done Age of Madness without First Law? Like, do you think, because I don't either. Like, I read it and I was like, I feel I get this. I get it. But this, I don't think could exist without the other.
I totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. He needed to do First Law first. And then you could see some seeds of Age of Madness in the First Law.
Sure.
But he had to get there. And I love that it's so Dickensian,
Yes.
And it's actually that was the first thing I thought of when I was from the very beginning of that trilogy was, wow, he's really going all out Dickens here.
Yeah.
And it's a good comparison in because of the themes, but also because of the character work. I feel like Dickens is another author who gives us vivid characters that are, they have a certain characteristic that we can know them by. And that's part of, I think, Abercrombie's genius is how vivid his characters are because of how he really leans into that one thing about them.
Yeah.
That we know, oh, that's that voice that he does so well. So yeah.
100%. It was funny because I didn't get the Dickensian vibe, even though I completely see it. I had French Revolution vibes 100% for Age of Madness. I was like, that is literally the best title for that trilogy because that's exactly what it is.
Bingo. Yeah.
Yeah. It was one of those things that I knew nothing about it going into it. I didn't want anyone telling me any spoilers for Age of Madness. And I'm not going to say anything for anyone else because I feel like everyone should experience it that way. But it is just such an interesting read because you feel like you have a really good grounding in that world. I feel like by the time, if you read it in the canonical order, by the time you get to that point in the story, you go, what is happening here? And it was just it was very masterfully woven. So it was interesting to kind of watch his different approaches in writing from one trilogy to the next.
Yeah, no, but I think you're absolutely right that he was much more planned about Age of Madness. And I think if I remember correctly, he had written the entire trilogy before it was published or something.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Something, I think, which might have allowed him to go back and tweak and, that.
Sure.
Kind of, but I love the new characters that we got in there.
I love Orso so much.
Orso's great. For me, Rika is another really wonderful character.
Fantastic. Those were my top two from the new trilogy.
I love Savine too.
A lot of people do.
Fascinating. Okay, I wouldn't want to be near her.
No.
But she's a fascinating character.
Yeah.
She's a fascinating character, and she's a kind of like as much as she has, I think, a personality and everything, she also seems iconic in a way.
Yeah.
Very few characters to me reach that status of being iconic. I can think of a few who are just they are that thing that they represent in a way. And Savine for me is like that. She reaches that status, the status of a Roland from the Dark Tower or something like that. To me, she is for me anyway, the protagonist of that trilogy in a way that no other character.
She was for me too. I would say that it was probably equal between her and Orso for me. I was like, oh, these are our two leads. That's kind of how I felt with it. I felt sort of similar with Glokta and Logan in First Law. I was like, these are our two mains. And then we've kind of got, even though everyone is sort of getting equal time. But for me, I think it's also just because I connected so much with Orso that I was like, main character without question.
I love Orso. Him, I actually hang out with. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, without question. Yeah. Without question. Orso is like, when I looked on the whole, all 9 books, he's in my top 3 characters. It's Glokta, Gorst, and Orso for me is my top.
Okay. Yeah.
I love Gorst so much. It's why I love the heroes so infinitely. Gorst for me, I don't know if I've ever laughed that much reading a book. Like his inner monologue, I think, is peak Abercrombie character work to the point where I was like, I don't even know why any of us are trying to write books when Joe's out here doing it so masterfully. Like, how do you write a character as good as Gorst? It's just so incredible. So yeah, I love him for that. But do you feel like for your own style of writing that you lean more in one camp of gardener or architect?
I'm definitely way further over on the architect side.
Okay, I'm gardener.
And every outline for all 3 books, before I wrote even a word of any of it, I had written 100 pages of history and mythology and everything else, and kind of made up languages. And of course, the first thing I did was draw a map, and everything had to be.
Yes.
I even looked up how many days would it take you to sail this distance, or ride a horse this distance. I had to look all that stuff up and make sure it all added up so that if somebody actually, and I don't think anyone has ever done this, but actually if someone had ever looked at my map and cared to see if this person could have reached this point in the same amount of time, this person could have reached this point over.
I've done that for books. Yeah. I have done that for books. I specifically did it for Wheel of Time because I was arguing. Well, my husband and I were on the same side, but I was like arguing at the void. I was like, there's no way they got there that quickly. And we went and we looked at the map and we like measured it in comparison to different time periods that they had mentioned in earlier books. So I appreciate that you did that because I 100% have done that already.
That's so funny. Okay, well, I guess they're out there then, yeah.
We're a very small breed of people. I wouldn't say we're the mass majority of readers, but either way. Do you feel like that obviously works for you because you've gone on and you've successfully written 3 books and you've published 3 books, which is a very commendable thing. Like, I think it's amazing. But do you find for you like, why the structure? Is it that it just keeps you more focused? Do you feel like because for me, I almost fear that much structure where I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm limiting myself in many ways. Whereas my husband is very much like you. He outlines quite significantly before writing a chapter.
Yeah, my answer is actually, if you want to highlight Sean's comment there in the chat, Sean Bobby Kerr's comment, that one, yeah.
Yep.
My answer is very much related to what he mentions there. So thank you, Sean. But it's the way I got into fantasy was through Tolkien. And when I was a 12-year-old kid,
architect of architects.
Exactly. The guy who spent years, inventing languages and stuff, and then needed a world for his languages,
Hence the linguistics love too, right? Like that makes perfect sense for you. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So yeah, I loved the process of building that world, of creating a secondary world, to use Tolkien's term. It's sub-creation. I just loved being lost and immersed in that. And actually, it's funny because I'm incredibly excited about the fact that Mark Lawrence has written a foreword for the special edition of The Way of Adan.
Very exciting.
That's coming out from the Broken Binding. That's exactly, cool. Yeah, I mean, it's so excited. Just he's a hero for me. But he wrote this beautiful little foreword, and that is exactly the subject of the foreword.
Really?
Yeah. Is the idea of, and it's funny because he's an author who doesn't do that. He just, he will write what needs to be written for the story to, go where it goes.
Connect.
But, his comparison is that it's like, a set on a Western where if you look behind the saloon, you can see the supporting struts back there, and that's, but for somebody like Tolkien, there's a whole world that exists there.
Yeah.
It's a bit like how they approached the films when they made the Lord of the Rings films.
Yeah.
There's stuff on that set that none of us will ever see.
Ever know, but it's there.
Ever know about, but it was there for the actors to feel like they were there in Middle Earth. And to me, I wanted to, as much as I could, create a world that felt it was lived in, that had a history and a mythology, and there was a landscape to it that made sense.
Yes.
That there were, place names that made sense from a linguistic point of view, that you wouldn't just put random cool fantasy sounding names all over the map, So it had to be a coherent, lived in world to me that I wanted. And I enjoyed that's the key thing.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy? If you enjoy doing that, why not?
I get it. I did that with my world too, honestly. But I then found when it came to sitting down and actually writing, I didn't have that structure, but it's similar. Like the first thing I did was a map and I was very committed to the idea because I drew it in color. So I was like, this is it. Like, this is the map. But it was the same thing. I wanted certain names to have that similar flow and cadence if they were geographically near each other, and to have, things that went together and things that separated them and all that kind of stuff. And I think it enriches a world so much. And honestly, for me, it's been one of the reasons that's been kind of driving this self-pub thing, because I didn't want to cut down that stuff in the book.
Sure.
And I feel like it's been really interesting seeing a lot of the indie books that have come out in the last few years where we're getting that richer, lived in feeling world because we're not being told you have to hit that specific word count you can't go over.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's made books poorer, but I so appreciate when I open a book and I'm like, I feel there's a history here that I'm now getting to witness. And there's dynamics that have existed for hundreds of years that we're like getting little slivers of and we're privy to. I think it just makes a book so much more nuanced and interesting.
Yeah, no, that's the freedom of self-publishing, and it's beautiful, but having said all that about being a planner, I also find that I have to listen to the story.
Yes.
And sometimes right in the middle of writing, suddenly the story just pulls me somewhere I had not anticipated, and I have to listen to that. So what became the trilogy wasn't what I originally, carefully outlined. And in fact, in some cases, I've made some radical departures from what I originally planned. And I think you have to be willing to do that in order for your story to feel a little alive, Sometimes the story just pulls you places, and you have
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I agree with this very, very much for Guy Gabriel Kay. His worlds, they are ancient is how I feel pretty much every time I open one, or it's just full in the best possible way. Yeah. Are you writing something new right now?
I am. Yeah. Well, I can't say it's new, but because I have a finished draft, and I've had a finished draft of it for quite a while. I wrote it after I wrote the third book in the Adan trilogy. But it is a sequel to the trilogy that takes place 15 years later.
Okay.
It's called While Darkness Gathers, and it's something I'm hoping to put out at this point, probably early in 2025.
Okay.
So yeah, it's some of the characters who make it to the end of the trilogy appear in the sequel, but it's a kind of a new story. Yeah.
Will this be a continued offshoot series or just a standalone, do you think?
It is a standalone in the sense that it comes to I hope, a satisfying ending. But I could see myself revisiting some of these characters. Some of the old and some of the new characters that appear in this book. Yeah.
Do you feel like you have multiple worlds in you that you want to write, or are you kind of more, I've got one world that I can explore different areas of?
I still feel like there's room for me to explore this world that I've created. I spent a lot of time doing it, so I feel like I should get some more mileage out of it. And I'm comfortable in that world too.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that though. I think it's an interesting thing because I think we talk a lot about Sanderson all the time and how he comes up with all these new worlds and magic systems and all that. I'm like, that's wonderful. And I love that. But I also appreciate like a Tolkien where it's the same world that we're just getting different time periods and different groups. And, like it's again, that lived in feeling where you just get to know one specific world so well. I love that. So
yeah, I have a ton of history that I've outlined for this world that it doesn't even get talked about in the trilogy. So a lot of things I could draw from if I wanted to continue writing.
Yeah. Daniel is asking, speaking of which, what's the word on While Darkness Gathers?
Yep, that's it. So I think early 2025. Yeah.
Are you going to be sticking with same cover artist, like all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I will be using the same cover designer.
Okay.
Jack Shepard, who also did the map for me. And
nice.
Has created a new color version of the map for the special edition, which I'm really excited for people to see.
Love that.
But yeah, he's going to be doing the entire cover by himself this time. So.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Gavin, I agree. I completely agree. We are lucky. We're spoiled a lot of the time. It's, you don't really think about it until you actually write a thing where like you sit down and sometimes you read a book in a day and you go, well, that was great. And then an author sat back and was like, this was years of my life that you just sat and read in like a few hours and you've moved on already. Like, it's such a different experience when you actually sit on the writing end of it.
But it is, I tell you though, it is a gift to have someone pick up your book and read it and experience whatever they experience, obviously. It's not a perfect transfer, this vision that happens within this mind, putting it into one of these, dead trees with symbols all over it, and then someone else reads it and takes it in, and something happens in their mind, and it's not a perfect transfer. But the idea that someone could do that, commit a story to a permanent, semi-permanent form, I guess, and that it could come alive within someone else's mind, that's a gift.
Oh yeah.
And to have that person then come back and say to you, wow, I this really resonated with me, this really helped me, this was very cathartic for me.
Yeah.
It's the best. It's really amazing.
I love that. I remember you and I were talking about it one the Dear Dr. Fantasy you had me on, and I was saying I'm too scared to read Hob, and you were saying that Hob for you was a really cathartic read in terms of your dog.
Yeah.
And I was saying, because we had just lost a cat recently, and I was like, I don't feel like I can read about animal stuff. Other than Hob, do you feel like there have been many authors that you've encountered where you have had that kind of catharsis while reading their book, and just it's been a different experience for you because it's added that extra layer?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, Hob is top of the list, of course. But also Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen for me is very much that way. It's incredible series to me, and very cathartic in moments that can't even explain how reading that series is such an incredible experience, and has a reputation of being this grim and awful thing. And
I'm also scared to read this series. These are my two series where I'm like, oh, guys.
There's so much beauty in both of them, actually. There's so much wonder and so much transcendence in both of those series that, yes, and they both have so much pain in them. And I think that's why they're a couple of my favorites, is that they have it all, but in a way that is affirming. And in the end, yes, there's so much sorrow in there as well, but it's just life. That's life, you know? It is this mixture of sorrow and loss on the one hand, and joy and triumph on the other. And it's about also the connections. In both cases, again, they're very different stylistically, by the way. But in both cases, again, it's about the connections that we make with not just other people, but with the beings around us, with the web of life. And that comes through so beautifully in both of those series. So they're for me a deeply spiritual experience that is ultimately, though there's plenty of suffering and pain, it's ultimately very affirmative of life.
I think that it's important to have those things, because so often people will give us that notion, right, that fantasy's not real. I can't connect with fantasy, in the same way. And it's like, no, there's so much of our existence that is imbued into these stories. And, from your experience, Hob and Erickson offer that avenue where you can relate to the emotion of it. It doesn't have to be the exact experience of what they're going through, but it's that emotional connectivity. And it's beautiful. Hello, Esme. Go back to sleep.
No.
Oh, I love you, but go sleep.
Sleep well. I would say the other author that I'm currently reading that's giving me that fix that I love, that depth and that vastness and that beauty and that sense of wonder, is Jenny Wirtz.
I can't wait to read her. I really can't wait.
I'm in the middle, literally in the middle of the Wars of Light and Shadow. Just finished the 6th book out of 11, and I find her work so transcendent, and the vision that she's laid out in there. By the way, it's 50 years of work she's put into that.
Yeah, it's what a commitment, right? What a beautiful gift to give people. That's just incredible. Yeah, I felt that way with Warlord Chronicles. So I am very excited for you to read
going
this.
full circle here.
Honestly, I feel like it had been a little while for me since a book kind of hit in that way, where it was more than just, I'm just enjoying myself. Like, what a fun experience. Whereas with Warlord, I would have to pause the book at certain points and just sit back and go, okay, like it's a lot. It's just human experience and human emotion. And I feel like for part of that, it might be because the series it's historical fantasy, I would call it, basically, but it's much more rooted in the historical than it is in the fantasy. And you just get that human connection and an idea of what life was like for people during that time period. And I thought that Bernard Cornwell did such a phenomenal job in terms of his historical references and research for that book, which for me, I am a total snob with historical fiction. If I am not one of these people that I'm like, they've changed all these aspects of history. I'm fine with it. I'm like, that's wrong. And I get hung up on it. So for me, it was just, there were so many different points of that story, especially with particular characters where it's, women on the precipice of marriage, young mothers, infant loss, like all of these different things. And as a woman, I was just sitting there and going, oh my God, these are like all these experiences that I myself have had or people I know have had. And this is exactly what it was like, and to feel like you're immersed with a character that knows your pain almost is a very spiritual experience for me, where it's like that validation that you sometimes seek from the outside world, where it's like not necessarily validation, where it's just understanding.
Yeah.
And you go, they get it. They get it. And that is just such an incredible feeling. It was so, so good.
It's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. So needless to say, I'm excited for 2025 for Dr. Philip Chase. No pressure. Jerry says, yeah, it's a gift. Honestly, I think that we're, it's a really awkward thing. I feel like because we live in such a time of accessibility and the internet, and we can have our opinion on something immediately thrust into the void, and it can be a negative thing, a positive thing, and whatever. It can be a middling thing. But I have a very awkward feeling of like giving reviews for things now in a way where I'm like, I feel it's very important to share things and how we feel about things. But simultaneously, I'm like, I'm at the point now in my life where I'm very reluctant to say, oh, that was a bad book. Because I'm like, it might just be a book that didn't resonate with me, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad book. It's not the book for me. It could be a book for this person, though. And there have been several instances where that's the case. Like Evie, whom I love so very much, loves John Steinbeck. This is something that she and I have talked about. I do not love John Steinbeck. And, that's totally fine. And that's not me sitting here going, I think he's a terrible author. No one should ever read John Steinbeck. It's me saying,
he's very talented. Yeah.
Yeah. He obviously had stories that he felt he needed to tell and wanted to tell. And those stories have resonated so deeply with so many people. They just didn't resonate with me, but that doesn't make it a bad book or a bad experience. Right. So it's gifts, but it's just not gifts for everybody.
There is a degree to which you can be more objective,
definitely,
in your assessments and your analysis, and the more about the more you know about how to do that, the more nuanced you can be in that. But you can never be completely objective.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be some subjectivity in that, I think. But you can reach for more objectivity in books. And I think anyone who has tried to write a book is probably going to be a little more sensitive to how much of a person's soul goes into that process and how much energy it takes to really do it. And I think that for me, I've always been, and I'm never going to tell anyone else how to review. It's everybody has their own style, and I'm fine with that. But for me personally, I've always said to myself, I'm going to review this book, but I'm going to pretend the author is sitting in the room with me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything that I wouldn't say in front of that author.
Yeah.
That's always been my rule when I'm reviewing, and that has helped me to be more respectful.
Sure.
And to acknowledge, yes, maybe I feel that there are aspects of this book that could have been worked on more, but I'm going to be respectful about how I formulate that and try to be as uplifting as I can and as constructive as I can in the process.
I feel like that's important, though, because I think especially, too, for newer authors, learning how to improve on your craft is inherently important, right? I mean, sure, you might be a writer who you just want to write everything that you want to write and you don't really want to think about changing stylistically over time or improving. But I know for myself that my goal is with each book I work on that I get better. It's a muscle that you work, and this is something that I was talking about with my husband, because he has been experiencing writer's block and he's been very frustrated by that. And, I said to him, I was like, he's a runner, and I'm like, the first time you went running, you didn't go and run out 5 miles. You might have, but then you probably passed out on the side of
so awful afterwards.
exactly. Yeah. Like, it's something you build up. It's something you work on. And I view writing to be very much the same way. I honestly view reading to be the same way too. And that, like, when we start reading, we have our early learner books and we work our way up, and that's just how it is. So I definitely think that is an appropriate way of looking at analyzing books and reviewing books. And that's how I would want someone to talk to me about, my work, and just be like, why did you choose to do this? And have that conversation, as opposed to just going, this was terrible.
I've gotten into a little bit of trouble here and there on this platform for trying to explore this idea that the whole like Goodreads, for example, which I think has its uses and can be a marvelous tool in some ways for building community and keeping track of your reading and that sort of thing. But I think that the idea that enjoyment should be the be all and end all of how you evaluate a book is seriously flawed.
I know, yeah.
And I've gotten into all kinds of trouble for saying this.
I know.
But I do think that enjoyment is important. I'm not saying it's irrelevant. Sure. And again, I don't think you can be completely objective, but I think you can also, if you choose, it's up to you. But if you want to include other types of evaluation besides enjoyment, you can. And it's not, to me, it's not the most interesting part of me experiencing someone else's, let's say, review of a book or their thoughts on a book. Actually, I'm usually much less interested in whether you enjoyed it or not. I'm more interested in what you saw in it, what themes it has, what kind of character work it has, what the setting is, and how the setting used to reinforce the themes, and is there symbolism in there? These are all things you can talk about in a way that is divorced from just enjoyment, So for me, and again, this is just personal preference, and I don't think, because I get accused of being elitist about this, I don't think it's elitist to say that anyone who wants to do that can do that.
No, it's definitely not. I feel I generally tend to be more easygoing with my evaluations, but I feel like part of it is because academically, that's how I was trained to be. When I reviewed something, I was like, I have to review it in this way. Right. And my brain did a very clear delineation. It was like, this is academic. This is not academic. But simultaneously, my major thing is, did a book make me feel something? And it's not necessarily an enjoyment feeling, because it can be, did it make me feel rage? Did it make me feel sadness? Did it make me feel joy? Right. Did it make me feel something? And did that feeling last once I closed the book? Like Pure Nessie was a perfect example where I felt such awe and wonderment, and just I felt like I was floating for like a few weeks after that book. I was like, why do I feel this way? Is it that I'm feeling like the spiritual connectedness in that book? Like what am I feeling? And for me, that it connects though to all of the things that you were saying. Was it the themes that made me feel something? Was it the setting, the language, the character work? Like, what made me feel that thing? Yeah. So I think sometimes we can be a little preliminary in how we come across if we say like, oh, well, I enjoyed it, so it's a 5-star read. But if you get into that deeper sensation, I guess, of like, what was it that drove you to that enjoyment? I think that all the things you say are what are right there. It's like, it's just reaching for it, maybe.
I mean, I can give examples. R. Scott Baker's books, I don't enjoy them, but they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant and they are relentless in holding up a mirror to us and showing us at our absolute basest, in the most horrific ways.
Sure.
there's a purpose for that. There's a place for that. I don't enjoy it, but I think
Right.
it's brilliant. There are so many examples. Crime and Punishment was a book that left me depressed
Yeah.
for weeks.
No surprise.
Did I enjoy it? No, I did not enjoy it, but
Uh-huh.
I'm so glad I read it because of how it challenged me and,
Yeah.
and how it made my imagination grow, and it made me, I think, a more reflecting person. So yeah, I think there's a lot more to reading than just enjoyment.
I felt that way about Flowers for Algernon.
Yeah,
Very much found that way. I was like, I'm not having a good time. I am not enjoying being here, but I get why we're here. So it's just, it's some stories will do that. And simultaneously, like Kyle just read Flowers for Algernon. He's like, oh, it's one of my books of the year. And I'm like, I'm so happy for you.
yeah.
I have nothing more to offer, but
gut-wrenching, really.
Yeah, I get it. So I completely understand that. But it is interesting just kind of looking at the way we experience books and the way that we communicate our experiences with books. And I mean, going back to what we were talking about earlier with like TikTok, it's like we've got this whole generation of people that are like, I'm going to tell you why I like something in 5 seconds. And I'm like, that's quick. And it's just a very interesting time, I guess, to be experiencing literature.
Again, I want to emphasize, because I think people are going to hear me, dissing enjoyment. The enjoyment is great. It's fantastic. If that's your primary reason for reading, great. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But my problem is when we hold up enjoyment as the only thing by which we judge a book.
Yeah.
Then I think that we're losing a lot there, but
I hear you. Speaking of that, like, elitist thing, because this is something that I've talked to Joanna about off screen regularly. We haven't talked about it in a little while, but we've talked about it quite a bit, in that how certain books have been labeled as more sophisticated than others, something like a Beowulf or the Iliad or the Odyssey. Do you find that that's something that you've encountered more, that like academic books get this label and this prestige to them that they don't necessarily warrant when we compare them to some of the books that, like, if you want to look at Malazan and compare it to like a different book that you might study at a university type thing? Like, how do you feel about the labeling of literature as a whole?
Well, I think it's artificial.
Yes.
You have this idea of this canon that somehow is etched in stone. Well, it's not. What we consider part of the canon today may be different in 100 years.
Sure.
You mentioned Beowulf. Beowulf wasn't taken seriously until the 20th century. It was dismissed as this rough, what is this crude? They didn't understand it really until Tolkien wrote Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics, and and basically said, why are we trying to treat this poem like it's something it's not? It's not meant to be a kind of a mine for historians or archaeologists. It's a tale, it's a story, it's a lament for the past. And that was the moment when people started to take it as story, really, and what it had to offer. And we were beginning to understand the whole, mechanics of Old English verse and everything. That was earlier, but still, the appreciation of Beowulf as a work of art was late in coming, in many ways. So I think our perception of a particular text can change.
Sure.
And I think we may be in a time when we're willing to consider that line between genre fiction, which has been so disparaged, and this idea of academic or literary fiction, that kind of thing, where there's no line. There's no who draws that line. There is no line.
For sure.
Yes, we can say there are certain stories and books that feel much more on this side or that side. And yes, we can acknowledge that, but there is no neat line down the middle anywhere. And there are a lot of authors who really straddle those categories.
Sure.
Some of them are our favorites in the genre. I'd say we were talking about Susanna Clarke. I think she's a great example of an author who, I think that's great literature, but it's also genre fiction. Do
you think accessibility has anything to do with that?
I think a lot of it is marketing, honestly. But I mean, it's strange how we humans we talked about language before and how
Yeah.
it shapes our perceptions. Well, categories, labels shape our perceptions. So if we call something fantasy versus magic realism, then we have a different idea about what it is, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was talking to my friend about this last night. He's Latin, and this whole notion that like magical realism like isn't fantasy and all that kind of stuff. I was like, it's so ludicrous. Like it's a blending of genres and all kinds of stuff. It was funny because for me, I had an experience with this earlier this year where I read The Bone Clocks with Joanna, and then Jimmy had already read it and came in. And I had such a hard time when I picked up that book because I was like, what genre are you? And like my mind couldn't grapple with what I was supposed to be expecting.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we have come to this point where we say, okay, fantasy has these tropes and these elements. We get this with lit fic. We get this with women's fiction. With romance, we get our happily ever after. And this is it. And I picked up this book and thought, I have no idea what I'm supposed to expect or what I'm supposed to do. And I had to say to myself, I was like, just read,
Yeah.
And it was this weird moment for me where I hadn't had that in such a long time, where I didn't even realize that I was going into books with these expectations subconsciously already in place.
Yeah.
And again, it's marketing, right? Where it's like, this is what you get now. And I remember just sitting back and going, this has been an interesting experience for me for the first like 50 pages, because my brain just did not know how to compute. And then finally I forced myself to turn it off, and I enjoyed the book so much.
And good for you that you were able to get outside that box.
It's weird. It's a weird experience. Honestly, that book as a whole is strange, but very good. So I recommend it if people haven't read David Mitchell.
Sometimes it's good. That's another thing literature does for us. It shakes us up. It disturbs our sense of, we know what everything is. These are the categories.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly this book comes along that just doesn't care about these categories. Mm-hmm. Like Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. What is that even?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great story that it's going to challenge your perceptions in so many ways. Mm-hmm. That we need that. And I didn't enjoy Book of the New Sun at all because it kept defying my categories, my labels.
Yeah,
making me think I don't know what's going on, and that discomfort, mm-hmm. I would argue, is good for you sometimes.
Oh, definitely. I completely agree. Would you say that you've had a book this year? Did you read it this year? Has that been?
I think I finished it last year. Mm-hmm. Now I'm questioning when I read it relatively recently, though. Yeah.
Have you had a book more recent than that that's kind of pushed you out of your normal boundary zone, where you thought, okay, I'm gonna give this a go and see where we land?
That's the biggest one I could bring up within recent memory, I think. Yeah, I would say so. There are other authors I read that I enjoy a lot that do it regularly, but mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone does it to the degree that Gene Wolfe does it.
Sure.
But like Mark Lawrence, we've talked about a couple times, he doesn't care about that line between fantasy and science fiction in his books. He just does what he wants to do,
Yeah. So. I found that about Spear Cuts Through Water, where I was just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't like that I don't know what's going on. That's something that I have realized about myself, is that I like to have, it's almost like being in control of the narrative, where I have an idea of where things are headed. And with that one, I was like, I have no idea, which I've been warned for Malazan. They were like, this might be a problem for you. So it might be. But it was a really good test run, I felt, for me, because eventually I was able to just, again, relinquish that and say, I'm here to experience the story that they want me to experience, rather than the story that I am trying to dictate in my head.
I will say that the first time I read the Malazan Book of the Fallen, this was before I knew, again, about BookTube or anything, mm-hmm. I kept going back to the character lists and the maps and everything. Just I needed to be master of the experience. And the second time, I just read through. Yeah. And of course, I had the advantage of already having read it once.
Sure.
That's cheating in a way. But I will tell you that I loved both times. But the second time was the most amazing literary journey of my life.
That's awesome.
I just feel like it was so much more connected with me so much more on an emotional level because I let go of that need to control the whole experience and just be kind of swept along instead. And I'm glad I was able to do that because I'm actually I'm kind of a control freak in many ways.
Me too.
It wasn't the easiest thing. Yeah.
It's not. It's really hard. And I think, again, it maybe comes back to that like marketing and genres and having a very clear expectation. And there's some authors that just say, we're doing it, guys, and you're either going to enjoy it and you're going to come along with the story that I'm planning to take you on, or this is going to be a nightmare experience for you. It's your choice. Would you say that there is a particular book that you are really excited to read by the end of the year that you have a feeling you're going to love?
Wow. Well, I'm continuing to love everything that Jenny Wirtz is writing. So I'll be continuing in that series. I'm also really, like I said, with Baker, I don't enjoy A.R. I don't enjoy that world, but he's just so brilliant that I find myself anticipating reading the next book in the Apocalypse for sure. So yeah, and so I'm looking forward to that very much. Yeah, those are the ones that spring to mind as probably. Great. Also, John Gwynn's Fury of the Gods. I'm really looking forward to that.
See, that's a perfect example for me where with Malice, I did not connect well with Malice at all, but I am appreciative that many people have. Like that for me, I get it. It just wasn't for me. Brian has a question here of, was Gardens of the Moon recommended to Philip, or did he just find it in a bookstore?
So that happened. There was a period in my life when I was determined to very systematically read everything in the best of fantasy. This was before BookTube again.
Yes.
But so what I did at a certain point in the early 2000s, I want to say, I can't remember exactly, but I looked up on the internet best fantasy books, and I read whatever lists and things were out there, and just systematically started reading them all. So all I knew about Malazan going in was that a lot of people liked it and considered it to be this brilliant, series. So I started that process in the early 2000s, and it continued into like the 2000 early teens, I guess. Where I was just broadening, because I had been a huge Tolkien nut for a long time. Yeah. And the first kind of big thing I read outside of that was probably A Song of Ice and Fire.
Not a bad one to go with.
Yeah. And those two are probably very much, part of my writer's DNA, or if you will. I think that that Malazan was a result of me wanting to just expand my reading of fantasy very consciously. And so, I didn't randomly find it in a bookstore. I had made myself a list.
It was intentional. Yeah. That's incredible. Well, it's a very interesting life in that you have been so greatly influenced by literature that your life's work has been devoted from that love, right? Like Tolkien has influenced and touched you in all these different ways of your life, and it's manifested in a career and a secondary career with writing, and just, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I kind of live in story all the time.
That's a great place to be. Unless maybe it's an R. Scott Baker novel for you, but a
little peril is okay, I guess.
Right, I suppose. Okay, so we have gone a little bit over, but please tell the fine people where they can find you on the internet.
Oh, mainly right here on YouTube, Philip Chase. That's my channel, very creatively named. Also, somehow I got the best of fantasy tag on there. That's part of the deal, I guess. But yeah, I'm also on, I keep not wanting to call it X, but
I call it Twitter. So that's fine.
Okay. Twitter, whatever you want to call it still.
Yeah.
I'm there. I'm not the most active person there, but I'm there as Philip Chase 90. No, Derry, I'm not going on TikTok.
I'm telling you, this is untapped potential. Oh, there's just so much waiting for you there.
Yeah, I think YouTube and Twitter are about all I can handle.
I got it completely. Everyone, thank you so much. Philip, thank you so much for coming on. This is a great chat. I'm so happy to chat with you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. I really enjoyed hanging out with you, and
Thank you.
I'm glad we're part of this community here.
Yes, we are very lucky. What a good place to be, right?
Yep.
If you would like to tell me in the comments below what you have been reading and loving lately, please do. If you're watching it on a replay, especially. If you would like to help support the channel, you can always hit like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. There's also a Patreon. The description is down below. But as always, guys, thanks for coming and hanging out with us on a Saturday night. We appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody in the chat.
Bye.
And Team Replay as well.
Yes.